private enterprise, and I represent what's bad about it, which is government. And I think what government needs to do is exactly help businesses enter into their markets with the very best possible terms, and by removing any unnecessary barriers to entry. It's of course impossible to remove all barriers to entry, but I think that we can have a very good guideline, which is the basic principles upon which the European Union has been established: freedom of goods, freedom of persons, freedom of capital, movement of capital. And I think in theory this is a very good principle. These are very good principles to follow, but in practice governments don't necessarily always see it that way, because they do tend to protect their workforce. They do tend to protect their businesses, their own particular interests. Therefore, we need to find ways, and I think this has to be a concerted effort throughout the European Union, of establishing equal basis for companies to enter into a market and to exit into a market. When it comes to Cyprus, you have to understand we're talking about a very small market. So in our case, you have to specialize. And the way we went about it is try to create Cyprus, to form Cyprus as a commercial center. So in order to attract foreign investment, we had to set up a transparent and valid regulatory framework that had credibility, because otherwise the serious investors will not come. But you also need to be flexible. So a company needs to be able to come in and get out as quickly as possible. So what we try to set up is we have found ways to make it easier for companies to register in Cyprus and function in Cyprus. Lately we've created a one-stop shop, whereas a company can come in, register and get all its permits from one place, so it doesn't have to deal with bureaucracy in order to start up and running. And also you have, I think, in order to invite investment and attract investors, you have to have an attractive tax system and a tax scheme. And I think we have been successful in a large extent in the past few years. I think right now funds coming out of Cyprus have made Cyprus the #1 investor in the Ukraine and the 3rd investor in Russia. So we have been doing something, right? But of course, it doesn't mean that we can claim that we have managed to find ways to make the Cypriot economy perfect. No, there are ways to become even better. I think our productivity could become better, and I think can improve our regulatory framework so we can invite even more investors into Cyprus.
To touch on a topic du jour, perhaps, Ireland is apparently to say tomorrow that it won't raise its corporate tax rate. How important is that from, maybe Ken, from your business perspective? Do you have investments in Ireland, and would corporate taxation be high on your list of issues for where you invest in?
Well, it's one of many. I think tax rate helps, especially when you have looking at manufacturing. Ireland historically has used that, and so a lot of companies have actually put their manufacturing in Ireland. I think more important than taxation is really, in our case, our business is about innovation, and it's really trying to look at unmet needs. The challenge we have are the governments that do or don't support basic research, basic science. So education, for example, the amount of scientists actually graduating in chemistry, biology degrees is not as high as it was 20, 30 years ago. So you look at today at the research base, a lot of it's moving either to the US or actually into Asia and China. And that's a scary thing. So if you're looking at on a nation basis, be it France, Switzerland, UK, and UK is still committed to the sciences, but it's difficult. And there's discussions, from some companies deciding do they still want to stay in the UK because the tax rate is so high. And the problem with our business is it's high risk. We spend about $1.5 billion on average to try to get a product to market, and even then there's no guarantees. And so, you have to look at your financial models and where you're going to take the risk and invest. And for us, innovation is the key driver for us. So,
maybe we can take some questions from the floor. If you can, if anyone's got a question, and if you can identify yourself and the company you work for. The lady here.
You can hear me. Hi, I'm Paola Cuneo from Think London. A question for James. You talked specifically about companies can access foreign markets, therefore they see this as a way to grow. But what about accessing skills in Europe? Do companies see this as a great way to grow and to develop?
I think it's a very good question, and I do think that you can attract skills in parts of Europe. But I think if you look at unemployment across Europe right now, I think most of the countries within Europe have an excess of labour right now. And I think for the cost and also the risk of not understanding employment legislation is not something I would encourage, because I've traded in a lot of these countries, and I think unless you understand the employment laws of those countries very clearly and very well, you are taking an additional risk that I don't think you necessarily need to take. If I look at the UK right now, I think most skills are readily available and at a very competitive price, because we ourselves right now have a high rate of unemployment, as is across Europe right now. So I think the cost of doing business from an efficiency perspective, I wouldn't necessarily encourage it. I think you should look at your domestic market first before you need to do that. I think just taking your point, Simon, on the Ireland issue, I think when you look at economies like Ireland that to me artificially show a low corporation tax rate, the question for me is, if I make a decision to invest in a country that in my opinion has an artificially low tax rate, the question is it sustainable? And if my business model is based on 12.5% and it goes to 30, I'm out of business very quickly. So the question, I think, again, when you look at these markets, you need to ask the question, how sustainable are the assumptions that you're making in order to make a valid business decision?
And Nicholas, when policymakers are in the room and deciding and setting budgets, how much are you taking that into account? How much are you taking into account that businesses want certainty over a long period of time versus a government which perhaps maybe wants a pre-election spurt in growth, or a pre-election giveaway that they'll have to, they know in their heart of hearts they have to reverse on the other side?
Well, I think that is a very valid comment, and I think that James is absolutely right that businesses need certainty. So therefore you cannot keep changing your tax system upon a whim, or just because you are facing a recession. And because in my country we have had this discussion very recently about whether we'll raise corporation tax, and this was voted against. It was presented by the government, but the parliament voted against it. And this was precisely the reason, because we do have a low taxation corporate tax in Cyprus. I mean, it's pretty similar to Ireland. And I think at this point, when precisely our problem is growth, and we are trying to invite more foreign businesses into Cyprus, and we are trying to attract more foreign investment, I think this is precisely the wrong time to increase taxation. This will stifle growth, and I think we need to find ways. I think this is, the question for most of the economies of Europe: find ways of cut spending without increasing taxes. It's usually impossible, especially when things do tend to go very badly, as they have done throughout the 2 previous years. But I think that this is the reason why all member states needed to follow the fiscal policies of Maastricht. I think one of the main failures of the European Union throughout the past years is that they knew we had some weaker member states that were not really following the fiscal policies. They were